I'm Shelley Martin Del Campo from Tri-State Generation and Transmission in Denver, Colorado. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from the 2022 NRECA Power Exchange and Tech Advantage Experience, March 6th through 9th. NRECA members, register now on Cooperative.com to make valuable connections and get up to date on issues and trends that are impacting our industry.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. Sales of electric vehicles are skyrocketing in the United States as Americans begin to embrace these highly efficient and fun-to-drive machines, and more car manufacturers commit to releasing all-electric models. But until now, the popularity and success of EVs has largely been centered around urban and suburban areas. For a variety of reasons, the enthusiasm has been slow to catch on in rural America. What are the reasons for this dynamic, and what are some of the things electric cooperatives are doing to reverse this trend? We'll talk about that with Brian Sloboda. He's NRECA's Director of Consumer Solutions, and Wendy Youngren. She's COO of WH Holding, which is a subsidiary of Wright-Hennepin Cooperative Electric Association. Brian, Wendy, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for talking to us. Brian, let me start with you. I think everybody has a pretty good idea of what an electric vehicle is and how they work. But what may not be as obvious is why are we working toward electrifying our transportation sector? Is this a good thing? Is it good for people? Is it good for co-ops?
Thanks, Scott. It is a good thing for a variety of reasons. What we see with electric vehicles is that, according to independent analysis from folks like AAA and Consumer Reports and other experts, it costs less to operate, it costs less to maintain, and that there is generally an environmental benefit going to an electric vehicle. But then there's this other really cool attribute. They're fun to drive. They have a lower center of gravity, they have higher torque, and that means they're more enjoyable, they corner better, and they perform very, very well. I often call them, the modern day muscle car. And for the co-op, what you have is a new load that people can get excited about, and it's also a load that can charge at night and really make use of low-cost power at night, help load factor for the utility. So it's one of these situations that, when properly managed, it can be a win-win for everyone involved.
Great. So one of the things that we do see is that there's this fairly dramatic split right now between sort of the uptake of EVs in urban areas versus rural areas. There's much higher adoption rates in and around cities than in small towns. Wendy, you're in somewhat rural Minnesota, about 30 minutes outside of Minneapolis. Is this something that you're seeing where you are, and what are you hearing from your community members?
Yeah, Scott, so thank you. We are fortunate to have kind of both sides of the spectrum in our service territory. So our eastern service territory is very urban, and our western service territory is very rural. And so we are seeing a much more higher adoption rate for electric vehicles in our eastern territory. And I think that all evolves around all the things we hear about EVs, just about, is the infrastructure available? It's more readily available, obviously, in the urban areas. There's still that thing called range anxiety out there where people feel like they're not going to be able to get to their destination if they live out in the rural area. And then just overall education and support for electric vehicles is much more readily available in the urban areas as opposed to out in the rural areas. And then you have to look at demographics too. So right now, some higher front end costs for electric vehicles. And a lot of times that rural member or rural customer just doesn't have the support available to enter into an EV at this time.
Wendy, you mentioned the infrastructure, and that's something I want to talk about. We've heard about the digital divide with broadband. There's also sort of this concept of a charger divide with EVs, where the charging infrastructure in an urban area is much more robust than in rural areas. If you could both sort of chime in on what's going on there. Is that something that you're seeing, Wendy? And what are co-ops doing, specifically your co-op, to sort of bridge that divide?
Well, I think you're seeing a lot of the corridors for EV charging are being built along, major freeways and highways, which makes a lot of sense. And of course, in the rural areas, there isn't that type of infrastructure available. But we are working, with our commercial customers and our members to bring EV charging to their homes and facilitating that through good programs and rebates so that we can overcome that hurdle of that range anxiety, and also just a lot of education. So if you think about the service territory and you start talking to members about the EV they have and the range it has, and get into the conversation about how much they actually drive each day, you can overcome that hurdle pretty easily just with good education.
Great. Brian, what are you seeing on more of a national level? Is that something that is impacting the uptake of EVs?
I think it does impact a little bit. I think bigger impacts come from the upfront costs and lack of model diversity. But I think when you look at charging infrastructure, 80 to 90% of charging is going to happen at home. So who are you building the public charging for? You're building the public charging for those people that rent, for people in multifamily dwellings. But you're also building it for the folks going on the family vacation. When you pack your kids into the car and you go off to visit one of our national parks, you're going to have to use infrastructure. When you want to put the kids in the car and you go to grandma and grandpa's house, you're going to need public charging. So it's those sorts of situations. In order for electric vehicles to become mainstream, there's several things that are going to happen. And one of those is making sure that people can get to the beach, they can get to grandma's house without worrying about running out of energy.
That's great. And you mentioned model diversity, and that's something I want to get into. Brian, you're sort of very vocal about this particular point, but at the moment, there's a really limited number of EV models on the market. Is this one of the key things that needs to change for EVs to get broader acceptance?
Yeah, this is one of the key things that needs to change. We see a lot of announcements. There are a lot of models available in the United States. I think right now it's well over 40 different electric vehicles are available for purchase. The problem is that many of those are only available in select markets. They're produced at small numbers. To be more successful, we need more manufacturers electrifying more of their lineup. So the recent announcement from General Motors of 2 SUVs and a brand new pickup truck is very exciting. The announcement from Ford of increasing the number of Lightning pickup trucks is very exciting. And the announcement from Dodge of an electric muscle car is outstanding. But what you need to be successful at the end of the day is for the consumer to go to the car lot, and whatever car they want to buy, there's an electric option for that car, because we know that the car buying public is pretty loyal to make and model and pretty loyal to body style. If you want a pickup truck, you're not going to buy a Tesla Model 3. And if you're a Ford person, you're not going to buy a Dodge pickup. So you need options.
That's great. And Wendy, I would love to hear your perspective on this. We sort of have been thinking of EV pickups as being what's going to bridge that gap between rural and urban areas in the uptake of EVs. Do you think that's true? And have you been hearing that from your members in your community?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Brian said. When you bring on more models, there's so much brand loyalty from vehicle buyers and owners, and especially here in rural markets where people need a pickup truck and they are used to having a pickup truck, and they start to understand how well these electric pickups can perform. It takes away the notion that they're not going to be able to use it for all the things that they use it for in their rural lifestyle, pulling trailers. Just having the availability of that type of vehicle is going to be a game changer for the rural markets.
Yeah, and Brian, along those same lines, are you seeing in these pickups, is there any reason for a potential buyer of an electric versus a fossil fuel-driven pickup? Is there any reason not to choose EV at this point? I mean, do they have sort of the same torque and towing and payload capacity?
Very similar. The challenge with trucks is going to be, how much do you want to tow? Are you going to be able to put a bunch of cows in the back of a trailer and tow it with a Lightning? Probably not. Will you be able to tow a boat? Will you be able to tow a trailer? Yes, absolutely. And what you see with the electric truck, specifically with the Ford Lightning, is the ability to provide backup power to your house during an outage with some of the options that Ford is making available. And that sort of vehicle to home emergency generator type of application is going to be very appealing to some folks. And then on the fleet side, what you're able to do is forget bringing a generator to the job site. Now you can power up all of your batteries. You can power up other applications on the job site using your electric pickup truck. And really to Wendy's point, you're looking at pickup trucks, SUVs like the Chevy Blazer being electrified, all having that, diversity of models that people are looking for so that they can tow things, so they can carry the kids, so they can haul all the stuff to make everyday life livable and fun.
One of the things that I've seen that tends to be listed as a major prohibition toward uptake of EVs is just the straight upfront cost. Wendy, is that something that you're seeing? Is there anything that co-ops can do? Is there anything that local governments and state governments can do to even that out so it's not so out of range for so many consumers?
Yeah, and I think that we're starting to see maybe some movement there with incentives. But as the technology changes and expands and we get the infrastructure in place, and I'm not just talking about charging infrastructure, I'm talking about service infrastructure and all of those pieces in place, the costs will start to come down. But right now, it is a bit of a barrier for people wanting to enter into an EV is that upfront cost. And I do believe over time that will be less of a barrier as we address some of these other issues surrounding infrastructure and service and technology needs.
One other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is the idea that some of these rural car dealerships, or a lot of rural car dealerships, their sales teams either don't have the expertise or don't know enough about how to sell an EV, and that is something that it's sort of a point of sale where that EV could become attractive to a consumer, and it's not because the sales staff doesn't have the expertise to actually sell it. Brian, is that something that you're seeing nationally? Is that getting abated? And then Wendy, I'd like to hear if you're seeing that in your territory.
Yeah, I think that's getting better, Scott. The reality is that whether you're a salesperson in a rural area or a driver, you have limited experience with EVs. And state dealer associations, the manufacturers are all working with dealers to educate the sales staff. There are utilities out there working with dealers to educate them on utility incentives. But, at the end of the day, the salesperson wants to put a person into a car that fits their lifestyle, that's going to make the person happy. And you're only going to get that done if the manufacturers are making the cars. When you drive an EV for the first time, everyone recognizes the power, the torque, the ease of driving, the no gear changes. There's many positive attributes to the EV. But most dealerships today still don't have one on the lot for people to test drive. So we got to get the manufacturers to send them out so people can actually experience it firsthand. No one's going to spend $40, $50, $60, $100,000 on a car that they've never touched.
I agree. So the more rural dealerships that we encounter here, they don't have the availability of an EV on their lot, even if you wanted to look at one. So I think it goes the same with them as the consumer. Once they can get into the vehicle and they can understand it, salespeople want to sell. And so you have to give them the materials and the education to be able to sell what's available to them. And I think right now it's hard for them with any type of vehicle, much less introducing, a brand new technology. So again, it does go back to the manufacturer being able to provide the electric vehicle and the electric vehicles in every market so that they become mainstream. And that's just not happening right now.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing to that, Scott. You have folks out there trying to make the dealer seem like the bad person in all of this, and they're not. They just want to make the car buying public happy, and they can only do that if they have the models available to them. And there's a lot of change, and change is scary, but they're not the bad guys. And when people accuse them of trying to, thwart the evolution of the electric vehicle, it doesn't help. So it's really about partnerships and building rather than tearing down.
Yeah, and we've had similar experience here where we've had several of the dealership representatives come to us and say for the first time, we've never had to partner with the fuel provider. It just hasn't had to be an option. And now they're looking for advice on how do we help people with charging, what incentives, programs, where should we be turning these customers to? And looking for ways to partner with the dealership in getting the infrastructure in their home and then getting them on that program. As Brian mentioned earlier, how important it is going to be for co-ops and other utilities for that matter to find that way to support that end-to-end experience and get the consumers and members onto these overnight charging programs. It's going to be more and more important as we move forward with more adoption of EVs.
That's such a great point. I wonder, Brian, have you talked to other co-ops who sort of advise them to proactively seek out these dealerships and say, hey, we're ready to work with you. We're ready to talk to you about what the needs are going to be once these consumers bring these models home?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Co-ops are talking to their dealers. The problem is always how do you get people's attention, because the sales staff, if they're sitting in a meeting with the co-op, that means they're not walking the lot selling cars. So it's getting people's attention. And it's also, what Wendy and Wright-Hennepin is doing is great. And that's what really I recommend a lot of co-ops do. Have those conversations, because this is a completely new experience. The way that you fuel the vehicle is so different. You're not doing it once a week. You're doing it, every day or every other day on your driveway, inside your garage. It's so much more convenient. But having that positive conversation that, yes, we want to be allies in this, that can go a long way.
Great. Why don't we pause here quickly for a word from our sponsor? And when we come back, I want to talk about whether or not EVs have a unique advantage for rural residents.
Support for Along Those Lines comes from NRECA Power Exchange and Tech Advantage Experience. Co-located in Nashville March 6th through 9th, these events offer NRECA members cutting-edge content from industry experts as well as the popular expo. At Power Exchange, co-op leaders will share ideas, strategies, and best practices about the critical issues impacting our industry. At Tech Advantage Experience, co-op technology leaders will gain a 360-degree view of the solutions that promise to drive co-op efficiency and enhance strategic planning. Register now on cooperative.com.
I'm Sandy Kaysen from Whitewater Valley, REMC, in Liberty, Indiana. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. I sort of want to bring it back to what we started with this sort of general idea about whether EVs are a good thing. And I want to drill down on whether specifically for rural residents, are there things about EVs? And I know, Brian, you touched on this and so did you, Wendy. But let's talk about some of the specific things that might be of benefit to rural residents that EVs bring. Wendy, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I just think it's the ease of the electric vehicle. If you have the infrastructure available, it's easy to charge your vehicle. And I think that's important for, consumers to understand that it is available to be charged at home. You're not having to leave to get your fuel source. So I think that's really important. As technology evolves and there's more products and services and the availability to use that vehicle as, a backup generator or to be a source for other electric vehicle charging of other implements, then I think it becomes more important in the rural community to not be so dependent on another fuel source, and they can be a little bit more self-sufficient.
Yeah, I think Wendy's absolutely right. And I would add into that, right now this is January, and up where Wendy is, there's a lot of snow on the ground, and electric vehicles aren't just these little tiny cars. You've got pickups from Rivian. You have SUVs, you have electric vehicles out there with the ground clearance to handle the snow. And then when you factor in that you can wake up every morning to a full battery in the car, you don't have to go to the gas station, you don't have to get out when it's sub-zero. The electric vehicle provides a lot of value to rural residents, just as it does to suburban residents. But that key is always going to be giving the buying public choices.
What about range in the rural areas? As an urban driver, you don't have to worry too much about whether you can get from A to B because your general drives are not that long. Are there sort of quantum leaps being made, Brian, in the manufacture and the range capabilities of these vehicles that will then make them more attractive to rural drivers who, going to the doctor can often be a 40, 50-mile trip?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen is that the range is going up. So 200, 300 or more range on electric vehicle is pretty common these days. So you should be able to do those things without worry. But that is where infrastructure comes into play. One of the things that I recommend is areas like rest stops, health clinics, any place where people go as a destination. It's probably a good idea for some sort of charging station. So you can do those everyday tasks without much worry. But here's the thing. As a person who's using a car, you have to look at how do you actually use the car? How often do you take those long drives? Do you own more than one car? And figure out if this fits your lifestyle. I would never say that EVs are right for everyone. You have to fit the car to the lifestyle of the individual or the family, or maybe it's just one of the cars that they own. But you really do have to look at how you use your vehicle.
And Wendy, what are you seeing not only at Wright-Hennepin, but maybe some other co-ops in Minnesota and in your region? How are co-ops sort of incentivizing EV ownership? Is it in their interest to get as many drivers out there in EVs as possible? And are they offering things like bill credits for off-hours charging, things like on-bill financing for level 2 chargers in the house? What are co-ops doing specifically to try and move this needle a little bit?
I think you're seeing a variety of programs that incent either time of use or traditional off-peak charging. We at Wright-Hennepin were introducing a subscription rate charging that, has basically flat rate charging and then uses time of use during high peak times, but they can charge however much they want on off-peak and weekends and holidays. And then for incenting the charging itself, the charger infrastructure or the charger itself is done through a variety of rebates or incentives or financing. We use rebates to help cover that cost and then obviously want them on a program. So I think you're seeing more and more adoption of that type of strategy, both in getting the charging infrastructure in place and then incenting to be on some type of off-peak or time of use program for the actual charging itself.
Right. And as far as what happens on the co-op side of the equation, and I'll kick this to both of you if you can both weigh in, there's certain things that co-ops and grid managers need to do to make sure that there's enough energy on the grid to charge this. If it takes off the way people are predicting that it will, from what I understand, the grid is probably not ready right now to handle that kind of load. What needs to be done on the co-op side? What needs to be done on sort of the energy manager side to make sure that that power is there?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of study on the infrastructure impacts at our co-op in particular. And we're seeing that right now we've made some changes to how we're putting in new services, and transformer loading is going to be something that we're going to have to look at. Where we would see the most impact is if you had pocketing of EV owners in a particular neighborhood, which tends to happen. Your neighbors get a nice new Tesla, and then the neighbor 2 doors down really thinks they're cool and they want one, and then all of a sudden you have a whole neighborhood full of Teslas and you do run into an infrastructure issue. But for the most part, it's good planning. It's good, looking at how EVs are impacting. We've been able to kind of overlay that over our system and develop some different scenarios on, what if this happened, or what if we had an entire neighborhood that had all, EV ready homes built and every other home had a EV charger. So it's going to take a lot of work from the co-ops to understand how it's going to impact their individual systems and start planning accordingly. So we're well on our way to doing that at our co-op.
Yeah, Wendy's absolutely right. She hit the nail on the head. It's that planning. And what we've done at NRECA is work with one of our partners to develop a market penetration tool, and we've worked with a couple of co-ops to analyze their service territory to see how many EVs they will have over the next 10 years and where will those pockets be so that they can manage both the distribution and the power supply side. We're looking at rolling out later this year a vehicle segmentation model so that co-ops could use that service to determine what is their EV potential. So there's a couple of different products that we have available on a fee-for-service consulting basis to help analyze the future EV market within a given service territory. But it starts with doing an analysis and doing the planning. And Wendy hit the nail on the head when she said pockets, because we are seeing that EVs for the next few years, you can expect them to be in pockets because one neighbor, as Wendy said, buys one and that gets other people interested.
I wonder, for drivers out there who are considering EV, is there anything right now, either existing now or on the near-term horizon, that would compete with electric for the future of the transportation sector? We've heard of fuel cells and other technologies. Brian, is there anything that you're seeing that's going to be better than an electric vehicle in terms of the things that it brings to the table in the near term?
So for passenger cars, light-duty pickup trucks, I believe it is going to be electric. If you go up to the big rigs, the tractor trailers, maybe fuel cells, but I think for the next few years, electric is the best bet. NRECA was a co-sponsor of an electric truck demonstration last September with over a dozen trucks around North America, and absolutely electric right now for the big trucks is the best bet. Long-term hydrogen, but definitely for what you're going to put into your garage, I really honestly do not see anything competing with electric.
Great. Well, it's really exciting times, and your insights have been amazing on this. So I want to thank you, Wendy and Brian, for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Scott.
Hey, thank you, Scott.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor this month, NRECA's Power Exchange and Tech Advantage Experience. For more on this and other podcasts, visit electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Wendy Wood from Surrey-Yadkin Electric Membership Corporation in Dobson, North Carolina. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.